The sun dipped low over the bustling spaceport, casting long shadows on the dusty outskirts where Marcus's repair shop stood. It was an unassuming place, a squat, metallic building surrounded by piles of spare parts and half-dismantled ships. Inside, Marcus was bent over a workbench, his grease-streaked hands deftly working on a malfunctioning engine core. The hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of a plasma torch were the only sounds that broke the quiet. Marcus preferred it this way. People came to him when they needed help, dropped their broken gadgets, and left him alone to work his magic. That suited him fine. His sharp mind and steady hands had earned him a reputation as the best engineer in the region, but he wasn't one for socializing. Machines were simpler than people. They had rules, logic, and problems he could fix. The door chime jingled, pulling Marcus out of his focused trance. He glanced up, expecting another scruffy pilot or trader. Instead, a tall, slender figure stood framed in the doorway. The sunlight silhouetted her unusual form, but as she stepped inside, Marcus froze. She was clearly not human. Her skin had a faint, silvery sheen, catching the light like liquid metal. Her large, almond-shaped eyes glimmered with an iridescent hue that shifted between blue and green. She wore a close-fitting suit of some alien material, sleek and functional, with a utility belt slung low on her hips. A faint air of authority clung to her, but her expression was neutral, bordering on cold. Marcus quickly wiped his hands on a rag, his brow furrowed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady despite his surprise. The alien woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise. She reached into a satchel slung across her shoulder and pulled out a small, glowing datapad. "I need these parts," she said, her voice soft but carrying an unfamiliar accent. She handed the datapad to Marcus, who hesitated before taking it. The list was detailed and complex, filled with components Marcus didn't see every day. Some of the items were rare, even for the diverse traffic of the spaceport. He raised an eyebrow, glancing back at her. "This is some high-grade tech. What kind of ship are you running?" Her lips tightened, as if she found the question unnecessary. "It's classified," she replied curtly. "Can you supply the parts or not?" Marcus bit back a retort. He wasn't a fan of the haughty tone, but something about her intrigued him. She didn't look like a soldier, but there was a tension in her posture, like she was ready to spring into action at any moment. He tapped the list with his finger. "Some of this I've got in stock. The rest, I'll need time to source." "How long?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Depends. A day or two, maybe more if the traders are being difficult." Marcus leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You're in a hurry, aren't you?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. "I have a deadline," she admitted. "If you can't meet it, I'll find another mechanic." Her words stung more than they should have. Marcus prided himself on his work, and the idea of her doubting his capabilities lit a spark of defiance in him. "I didn't say I couldn't do it," he said firmly. "I'm just saying it'll take time. Rare parts don't grow on trees." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Very well. How much?" Marcus rattled off a rough estimate, and she reached into her belt, pulling out a slim, translucent credit chip. She placed it on the counter with a delicate but decisive motion. "Half now. The rest when the job is done." "Fair enough." He pocketed the chip and gestured toward a chair in the corner. "You might as well sit down. It'll take me a while to sort through the inventory." To his surprise, she didn't argue. She walked over to the chair and sat, her movements as graceful as ever. As Marcus turned back to his workbench, he couldn't help but steal a glance at her. She was examining the shop with a faintly critical eye, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. "So," Marcus said casually, breaking the silence, "what brings you to this part of the galaxy? You don't exactly look like the usual spaceport crowd." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was cool, almost detached. That's not relevant to the job. Marcus shrugged, turning back to his work. Fair enough. But if you're going to be hanging around here, you might as well get used to some small talk. She didn't respond, and for a while, the only sound was the clinking of tools and the faint hum of the shop's generator. Despite her aloofness, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. Something about the way she carried herself, the way her eyes flicked toward the door every few minutes. It all pointed to someone on edge. Whoever she wasn't just here for spare parts. And Marcus had a feeling that helping her was going to be a lot more complicated than he'd expected. Marcus had expected Tala to be one of those customers who simply left him alone to do his work. But as the hours passed, he began to notice something strange. She wasn't just sitting idly in the corner. She was watching him, observing, almost like a scientist studying an experiment. Her eyes never seemed to leave the tools in his hands, the way he worked the circuits, the way he understood machines. It made Marcus uneasy at first, but then it became clear she wasn't just here to drop off a broken ship. Is there a reason you're staring at me like that? Marcus finally asked, wiping the sweat off his forehead. Tala looked up from her silent observation. She seemed unbothered by his question. I'm studying your methods, she replied coolly. Your technology is inefficient, yet effective. Marcus blinked. Inefficient. He looked down at the half-fixed component in his hands. It works, doesn't it? Tala didn't answer immediately. She stood up and walked over, her light footsteps making no sound as she crossed the shop. She ran her fingers over one of the tools on the workbench, an intricate piece that had been in Marcus's family for generations. Primitive, she muttered, almost to herself. Marcus frowned, his temper flaring. I don't see you fixing anything. You're the one who needed help. She turned sharply at his words. Her eyes narrowed. My methods are different, she said, her tone sharper now. Efficient. Advanced. Yeah, well, not everything needs to be advanced, Marcus replied, his voice rising slightly. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Tala's lips twisted into a faint, knowing smile. You wouldn't understand. Marcus' jaw tightened. He couldn't stand the way she dismissed him. He had spent years learning and perfecting his craft, and yet this alien, who clearly thought she was superior, was looking down on him. He put down the component with a sharp clink and walked over to her. Why don't you show me how it's done then? He challenged, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, there was silence. Tala seemed to consider his words. Then, to his surprise, she agreed. Very well. If you think I'm wrong, I will demonstrate. Marcus stepped back, crossing his arms. Go ahead, show me how it's done. Tala's gaze softened slightly, as if she hadn't expected this kind of challenge. With a smooth motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small metallic device. It was something Marcus had never seen before, a smooth, sleek object, covered in strange markings. Tala placed it on a workbench with care. This is the stabilizer core for my ship, she explained, her voice softer now. It's damaged and the power flow is unstable. A human mechanic would attempt to patch it up with basic tools. But that will only be temporary. Marcus leaned in, his interest piqued despite his frustration. What would you do then? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Tala didn't answer right away. Instead, she activated the device, and it hummed to life, glowing faintly. Her fingers moved with precision, touching parts of the device that seemed to respond to her touch. The core pulsed with energy, and for a moment, Marcus felt a strange sense of awe. It wasn't like anything he had ever worked with. She looked up, meeting his gaze. The problem is not in the technology, she said, her voice steady. The problem is the mindset. Humans rely too much on brute force, while we understand the power of subtlety. Watch. With a flick of her wrist, the device changed. The hum of power shifted, and the device seemed to stabilize. Tala nodded, satisfied with her work. There, it's functioning again. It will last longer than any patch job you would have done. Marcus stood there, stunned. He had no words. She had done it in minutes, something he had thought would take hours. The way she manipulated the device was something beyond his understanding. It was as if she was bending the energy itself to her will. But despite the awe he felt, something inside him bristled. "So you're saying my way is wrong?" he asked, his voice tight. Tala didn't seem offended. Not wrong. Just limited. Marcus clenched his fists. "And you think your methods are better just because they're alien?" He wasn't sure why he was getting so defensive. It wasn't like him to argue about things like this, but something about her calm, superior attitude grated on him. Tala's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her voice gentler now. "I didn't mean to insult you, Marcus. Your work is impressive. For a human." For a human. The word stung. "Right," Marcus muttered, turning back to his workbench. "Look, if you want your parts fixed, fine. I'll get them done. But don't expect me to agree with you." Tala didn't push him further. She stepped back and went to sit in the corner again, though her eyes never left him. Her gaze was thoughtful now, as if something had shifted in her understanding of him. The hours passed, and the two of them continued to work in near silence. But the tension between them didn't completely disappear. Marcus kept his focus on the parts, trying to ignore the feeling that something was changing between them. There was an underlying current now, one that neither of them could quite explain. As the day wore on, Marcus felt a growing curiosity about Tala, what she was really here for, why she was so distant, and why she seemed to look at him with a mixture of interest and pity. He couldn't deny it. Despite the friction, despite their differences, a part of him was beginning to wonder if there was more to this alien than just a customer who needed spare parts. And maybe, just maybe, there was something about her methods that he could learn from. The next morning, Marcus was busy tinkering with the last of the parts for Tala's ship when a loud thud rattled the walls of the shop. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the usual sounds of the spaceport. This was something else, something heavier. The sound of boots hitting the floor, the unmistakable clang of metal. Tala, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up instantly, her eyes widening. Her expression, usually so composed, now held a flicker of something darker. Fear, perhaps. She moved swiftly toward the door and pressed a button on the wall, locking it. Marcus raised an eyebrow, trying to keep his calm. "What's going on?" Tala didn't answer immediately. She was watching the door, her body tense, as if expecting something bad to happen. "We've been followed," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need to leave. Now." Before Marcus could ask another question, the door shuddered with another powerful thud. Someone, or something, was trying to break in. Marcus's mind raced. He'd seen enough fights and skirmishes at the spaceport to know this wasn't just a routine check or a misunderstanding. "Who's following you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with urgency. Tala didn't hesitate. "Mercenaries. They're after something I have. Something dangerous." That was all she needed to say. Marcus's eyes darted around the shop, looking for a way out. The front door was sealed, and the windows weren't much better. He moved toward the workbench, grabbed a few of his tools, and started working quickly. He wasn't a fighter, but he was no stranger to getting out of tight spots. "You can't stay here," Tala said, her voice strained. "They'll find us if we stay too long. They're tracking me. I need to get to my ship, but I can't do it alone." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure what kind of trouble he was getting into, but he didn't have time to think. "I'm not letting you face this alone," he said, determination hardening his voice. Tala nodded, the faintest trace of gratitude crossing her face. She turned quickly and headed toward the back of the shop, pulling open a hidden panel. Behind it was a narrow hallway that led to the rear exit. "Follow me." Marcus didn't waste any time. He followed her into the hallway, his heart racing as the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. He had no idea what kind of mercenaries were after Tala, but the fear in her eyes told him they were serious. They reached the back door, and Tala paused, pressing her ear against the wall. There was silence for a moment, and then she gave a small nod. She turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the stars twinkling overhead, but there was no time to admire the view. They moved swiftly down an alleyway, keeping to the shadows. Marcus kept his eyes on Tala, who moved like a shadow herself, as if she was used to being hunted. "You're not telling me everything," Marcus said as they rounded a corner, trying to catch his breath. "Why are they after you?" Tala didn't look at him. "It's complicated," she said curtly. "Let's just say I'm carrying something they want. Something that could change everything." Marcus didn't push her for more details. He had a feeling it wasn't something she could explain easily. And right now, surviving was more important than answers. They reached a narrow side street, where a sleek, silver ship was parked. The engine hummed softly, almost as if it was waiting for them. "Tala's ship. We're almost there," she said, her voice low. "Once we're on board, we'll be safe. I'll explain everything then." Marcus didn't ask any more questions. He simply nodded and quickened his pace. They were just a few steps away from the ship when a shout echoed through the street. "There they are." Marcus's head snapped around, his blood turning cold. A group of men, heavily armed, appeared at the far end of the alley. They were wearing dark armor, their faces obscured by helmets. They were mercenaries, dangerous ones. Tala's eyes flashed with determination. "Run," she shouted. Without thinking, Marcus turned and sprinted alongside her, the sound of boots pounding against the pavement growing louder behind them. The mercenaries were closing in fast. They had no time to waste. They reached the ship just as the mercenaries fired a warning shot. The blast narrowly missed Marcus, sending a shower of sparks from a nearby wall. Tala didn't hesitate. She hit a button on the side of the ship, and the door hissed open. "Inside," she commanded, her voice urgent. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He dove inside, and Tala followed right behind him. The door slammed shut, sealing them inside the ship. Tala wasted no time. She quickly activated the controls, and the ship's engines roared to life. The mercenaries weren't far behind, but they were too late. With a sudden burst of power, Tala's ship shot into the sky, leaving the mercenaries behind in a cloud of dust and frustration. As the ship climbed higher, Marcus's heart began to slow down, the adrenaline fading. He leaned back in his seat, trying to catch his breath. Tala, too, seemed to relax slightly, but her face was still tense. "Are we safe?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from running. "For now," Tala said, "but they'll keep coming after me. After us." Marcus nodded, glancing out the window at the stars now spreading across the dark sky. They had escaped, for now, but something told him this was only the beginning of whatever Tala was running from. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was involved now, whether he liked it or not. "What exactly are they after, Tala?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter this time. Tala was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice heavy. "A device, a powerful energy core. It could change the balance of power in this galaxy." Marcus frowned, trying to understand the weight of her words, but all he could think about was the danger that lay ahead, and how, somehow, he had become a part of it. Tala had come to him for help with spare parts, but now Marcus realized he was in much deeper than he'd ever imagined. The ship sailed through the dark expanse of space, the stars outside stretching into a blur of light. Inside the cockpit, Marcus sat in silence, his hands resting on the seat armrests as he tried to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. One moment, he had been working on a broken engine. The next, he was running for his life with an alien woman he barely knew. And she was hiding something. A device, a powerful energy core. And now, mercenaries were after them. Tala was at the controls, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Her movements were precise, calm even, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers occasionally tightened around the steering controls. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's engines as they cruised further into the unknown. Eventually, Marcus couldn't take the silence anymore. He leaned forward in his seat. "Tala," he began, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. "What's really going on? What is this device, and why is it so important that people are willing to kill for it?" Tala didn't respond right away, but Marcus could see her eyes flicker toward him for a brief second. She seemed to be weighing her options, as if debating whether to share the truth or keep him in the dark. She sighed, finally turning her gaze back to the control panel. "You deserve to know," she said quietly. "But it's not a simple story. It goes back a long way." Marcus sat up straighter, his interest piqued. He had expected an answer, but not this. "I'm not just any traveler," Tala began, her voice low and steady, though a hint of sadness lingered in her tone. "I belong to a race called the Vuoran. We're a peaceful species, for the most part, but we've always been on the edge of galactic politics, never fully trusted by the larger factions. We've stayed neutral, kept to ourselves, avoided conflict." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of where this was heading. "But that doesn't explain why mercenaries are after you, does it?" Tala's lips tightened. "No, it doesn't." She paused, her fingers hovering over the ship's controls as if lost in thought. Finally, she continued, her voice growing softer, almost hesitant. "The device is an ancient energy core, an artifact from a long-forgotten war between my people and a now-extinct enemy. It was designed to harness and store immense energy, enough to power entire fleets of ships or destroy them." Marcus blinked, trying to process her words. A weapon, that's what she was carrying. But why would she have it? Why would someone like her, who seemed so composed and peaceful, be holding on to something so dangerous? "It was meant to be sealed away," Tala went on, her voice distant, like she was reliving painful memories. "But after the war ended, there were factions within my people who believed it could be used to ensure our survival, to give us power in a galaxy full of more advanced species. Some wanted to keep it hidden, others wanted to destroy it. It split us apart." Marcus's mind was racing now. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. A powerful weapon, lost in time, capable of shifting the balance of power in the galaxy. No wonder people were hunting her. No wonder mercenaries were closing in. Tala took a deep breath, finally turning to face him. "I didn't want any part of it. That's why I left my homeworld, why I've been traveling for years. But the device, it's bound to me. My people think I can activate it. If I don't, they'll kill me for what I know. If I do, I risk unleashing something that could bring chaos to the galaxy." Marcus sat back, stunned. This was bigger than he had imagined. He had been caught up in a conflict he didn't even understand. And Tala was right in the center of it. "How do you even know how to use it?" Marcus asked, his mind racing. "I mean, it sounds like a bomb, or worse." Tala shook her head slowly. "I don't. But the device has a way of connecting with the user. Over time, I've learned to sense it, to understand it. But I only scratched the surface of its true potential. So why not destroy it?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "If it's so dangerous, why keep it?" Tala's expression darkened. "Because I can't. It's not just a weapon. It's a key to something bigger, something my people lost long ago. If I destroy it, I may be destroying the only chance to restore what was lost." Marcus frowned. This was a lot to take in. He didn't fully understand all the details, but one thing was clear. Tala was caught in a web far beyond her control. She had a device capable of massive destruction, but she didn't want to use it. And yet, her people, her very own people, were hunting her because they believed she could. "What now?" Marcus asked, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "What do we do?" Tala's eyes softened, though there was still a hardness to her gaze. "I don't know. I thought I could outrun them. But the closer I get to activating the device, the more desperate they become. It's only a matter of time before they catch up with us. The weight of the situation was sinking in. Marcus knew there was no turning back now. He was in this whether he liked it or not. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He looked at Tala, her face drawn with worry, her hands steady on the controls. For all her strength and resolve, she was just as lost as he was, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her story than even she realized. "Don't worry," Marcus said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "We'll figure it out. We'll find a way to stop them. Together." Tala turned to him, her eyes searching his face. For a brief moment, there was silence between them. And then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Together," she whispered. Marcus didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. The path ahead was filled with danger, and he was in it for the long haul. The ship flew through the vastness of space, leaving behind the planet they had just escaped. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his eyes scanning the stars outside the window. The peaceful blackness of space did little to calm the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. Tala's words, the device, the mercenaries, it was all too much. He never imagined his quiet life as a mechanic would be turned upside down by an alien with a deadly secret. Tala sat in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls, her face as calm as ever. But Marcus could see the tension in the way she held herself, the way her jaw tightened every time she glanced at the star map. They were running, but for how long? "Where are we headed?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. Tala's eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't look away from the controls. "A safe place," she said, her voice flat, though there was something in her tone that made Marcus feel uneasy. "A place I can hide for a while. Somewhere they won't find us right away." Marcus frowned. "That's it. Just somewhere they won't find us." Tala met his gaze, her eyes dark and full of secrets. "It's not a perfect solution, but it's all I can do for now. I need time to think, to figure out my next move." Marcus leaned forward, the gravity of the situation pulling at him. He had been caught in something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The mercenaries weren't the only danger. The device Tala was carrying, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a tool of power. It felt like it was calling to her, like it had a life of its own. "I don't know about this," Marcus said quietly. "I mean, we're running from mercenaries who have no problem killing people, and you've got a device that could cause chaos. This doesn't feel like something that's going to blow over easily." Tala's expression softened for a moment, but she said nothing. She just kept her focus on the ship's controls, steering them through the darkness of space. Marcus could tell she was trying to keep herself composed, but he knew it wasn't easy. There was a weight to her, something heavy she was carrying inside that even the stars outside couldn't lighten. The ship sailed through the cold vacuum of space, heading toward an uncharted system Tala had mentioned earlier. It was a place outside the reach of most of the larger galactic factions, a place where secrets could be buried, even if for just a little while. After what felt like hours, Tala finally spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something you should know about the device." Marcus turned in his seat, his interest piqued. "What is it? You've told me a little, but I still don't understand why it's so important." Tala hesitated, her fingers gently tapping on the controls. "It's not just a weapon. It's a key. A key to something far older than my people, something that's been lost for centuries." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? A key to what?" "I don't know exactly," Tala admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "The device was part of an ancient project, something my people began before the war. It was meant to unlock the potential of our species, to give us a place among the stars. But when the war ended, most of us forgot about it. The device was lost in the chaos, and now it's found its way into my hands." Marcus thought about her words carefully. A key, a lost project. It all sounded like something out of a story. something he never expected to be a part of. And yet here he was, caught up in it, tangled in a mystery that had the potential to change everything. "So, you don't know how to use it fully?" Marcus asked, still trying to understand the gravity of the situation. Tala nodded slowly. "Not yet, but I can feel it. It's alive somehow. It's calling to me, pulling me in. I can sense it more clearly now, but I still don't know what it can do." Marcus's mind raced. If the device could do what Tala said, it was a ticking time bomb. No one could be allowed to control something so powerful, but who would be able to stop them if they were pursued by mercenaries? "We can't just hide forever," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Eventually, they'll find us. They're not going to give up." Tala's face hardened. "I know." The ship rumbled, and Marcus could feel the change in its momentum. They were entering the edge of the uncharted system. It was a place where few ships traveled, a place on the fringes of known space. But even here, the threat of pursuit hung over them. As they entered the system, Tala initiated a series of evasive maneuvers. The ship turned, dodging behind asteroids and moons as she tried to lose any potential pursuers. For a moment, there was nothing but the sharp sound of the ship's engines and the tension in the air. "We're almost there," Tala said, her voice strained. "Just a little longer, and we'll be safe for now." Marcus didn't feel safe. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were only buying time. The mercenaries weren't far behind. If they were really determined, they would find Tala, no matter where she hid. As the ship slid past a dense asteroid field, Marcus noticed something in the distance, a strange signal blinking on the ship's radar. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make his stomach turn. "What's that?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he watched the signal grow clearer. Tala's hands froze on the controls as she looked at the screen. "That shouldn't be there." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Is it a ship?" Tala's voice was tense. "Yes, and it's coming right toward us." Before Marcus could respond, a loud bang echoed through the ship. The walls rattled, and the lights flickered. "We've been spotted," Tala muttered. "I knew it wouldn't be easy. Prepare for a fight." Marcus's blood ran cold as he grabbed the nearest tool, the weight of the moment sinking in. They weren't safe. Not anymore. The ship jolted again, a heavy thud that rattled the walls and sent Marcus tumbling from his seat. He barely caught himself on the edge of the control panel, his breath coming fast. Outside the window, a flash of light illuminated the blackness of space. The strange ship was getting closer. Tala's face was set in hard determination, her fingers flying over the controls as she struggled to keep the ship steady. The hum of the engines was louder now, more strained. She didn't look at Marcus, but her words were steady, betraying none of the panic that Marcus felt rising in his chest. "We've got to lose them, or they'll board us," she said, her voice tight. "They're not here for a friendly chat." Marcus scrambled to his feet, gripping the back of the seat for balance. His heart was racing, and every instinct in his body screamed that this was bad. "How do you plan to do that?" "By being faster," Tala said, "and more unpredictable." The ship shuddered again, this time with a loud, deep sound that made Marcus's stomach drop. He turned to the control panel and saw the flashing red lights that indicated they were being targeted. "They've locked onto us," he shouted. "They're going to fire." Tala's fingers moved quickly, flipping switches, pulling levers. "Not if I can help it." In a flash, the ship lurched to the side, sending Marcus stumbling against the wall. Tala had activated evasive maneuvers, sending the ship into a wild roll, twisting and turning to avoid the enemy's fire. The other ship shot a burst of energy in their direction, the beam streaking past them, grazing the side of the ship. A shower of sparks erupted, and Marcus instinctively ducked. "We can't keep this up forever," Marcus yelled, gripping the nearest support bar. "We need to fight back." Tala's eyes were locked on the enemy ship as it followed them through the asteroid field, maneuvering to match their every move. "I don't have weapons. This ship wasn't built for combat." Marcus felt a sinking feeling. Of course, the ship wasn't equipped for a fight. They were outmatched, outgunned, and their only hope was to keep running. But he couldn't ignore the fear that gripped him. They wouldn't be able to outrun their attackers forever. Eventually, they'd catch up, and there would be no escape. He turned to Tala. "What do we do?" Tala's face was unreadable, her hand steady, as she guided the ship through a dense asteroid cluster. But there was something behind her eyes, something dark and determined. "We don't have a choice. We fight, but not the way they expect." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Tala's voice dropped low, as if she were speaking to herself. "I've been saving this. I didn't want to use it unless I had to. But now we don't have a choice." She activated a hidden panel near the console, revealing a small, sleek device. It was a piece of tech Marcus didn't recognize, but there was something familiar about the way Tala handled it. She moved with precision, as though this wasn't the first time she had used it. "What is that?" Marcus asked, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. Tala didn't answer. Instead, she attached the device to the ship's main control system. A soft hum filled the cabin, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt a strange pulse of energy vibrate through the ship. The stars outside flickered. "Hold on," Tala said, her voice cold and calm. "This is going to get interesting." Before Marcus could react, the ship's engines roared to life in a way he hadn't heard before. A surge of power coursed through the ship, and Tala slammed the ship into a sharp turn. The other ship fired again, but this time, their blast was too late. The Vioran ship slipped through the asteroid field with newfound speed, darting between the large rocks with impossible agility. Marcus gripped the seat again, his heart pounding in his chest. "What did you do?" Tala didn't answer. She was focused on keeping the ship steady, weaving between asteroids like a skilled pilot, pushing the ship's systems to their limits. But Marcus could see it in her face. Whatever she had done had taken a lot out of her. "Why didn't you use this before?" he asked, more frustrated than anything. "This could have given us an advantage sooner." Tala glanced at him briefly, her eyes sharp. "Because I wasn't sure if I could control it. This ship wasn't designed to move like this. It's too unstable." The other ship was still behind them, and Marcus could feel the enemy's presence getting closer. But with the burst of speed they had just gained, the distance between them began to grow. Still, the mercenaries weren't far behind. "We can't outrun them forever," Marcus said, his voice rising with the tension. "They'll just keep coming. We need to take them out." "I'm working on it," Tala replied, her jaw set. She pulled up another screen, and Marcus saw that it was a targeting system. "I've activated the ship's secondary defense system, but it's not a weapon. It's a disruptor." "A disruptor," Marcus repeated. "What does that even mean?" "It jams their systems," she explained, her hands flying over the controls. "It will block their weapon systems, disable their tracking, and, if I do it right, take them off our tail long enough to make a jump." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "You can do that. You can stop them." "If it works," Tala said, her voice tight with determination. "But it's going to take some time. Hold on." With that, Tala activated the disruptor. The high-pitched whine filled the cockpit as a wave of energy shot out from the ship, creating a ripple in the surrounding space. For a moment, the other ship stopped firing. Their targeting system flickered, and the ship's engine sputtered. Marcus watched in disbelief as the enemy ship faltered, clearly thrown off course by the disruptor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Tala took advantage of the opening. She pushed the ship forward, aiming for the next nearby asteroid belt. As they sped through the rocks, Marcus could see the other ship behind them, slower and disoriented, still trying to regain control. "We've got a shot," Tala said, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen. "If we can make it to the jump point before they recover, we'll be safe." Marcus could hardly believe it. They were actually getting away. For now. But there was no mistaking it. They were in a race against time, and the mercenaries wouldn't stop coming. Not until they had what they wanted. "Let's just hope we make it," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Hold on," Tala said again, her voice as steady as ever. "We're almost there." The ship plunged deeper into the asteroid field, swerving sharply as it narrowly avoided large chunks of rock. Marcus gripped the seat in front of him, his knuckles white from the tension. The stars outside were a blur as Tala pushed the ship to its limits, trying to create enough of a lead between them and the pursuing mercenaries. "How much farther?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Not far," Tala replied, her voice steady but strained. She had been silent for a long while, her focus never wavering. Her eyes flicked from one screen to another, calculating their path with precision. "Just a little more. We can make it." The mercenary ship was still behind them, but it was lagging. The disruptor had done its job, and the enemy was struggling to regain control of their systems. Tala's breathing was slow but deep, as though she was gathering strength for what was to come. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if this would be the end of their escape. The mercenaries were relentless, and though they had gained some time, they weren't going to stop chasing them. The last thing Marcus wanted was to be caught, but the thought of what would happen if they did, he shook his head, pushing those dark thoughts away. They had come too far to let it all fall apart now. "How are we doing on fuel?" Marcus asked, noticing the ship's fuel levels were starting to drop. Tala glanced at the console. "We've got just enough for one jump. Maybe two if I stretch it, but we can't afford to wait longer than that." "One jump," Marcus repeated, the reality sinking in. They needed to reach the jump point before the mercenaries caught up, or they would be trapped. The distance to the jump point was closing in, but there was still too much space between them and the mercenaries. Marcus could feel the pressure mounting, each second bringing them closer to danger. He knew Tala was doing everything she could, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. "We're almost there," Tala muttered, her fingers working quickly over the controls. She activated the final maneuver, guiding the ship toward the hidden jump point, a small, uncharted rift in space, a place where they could slip through to another system. Suddenly, a warning light flashed on the console, and Marcus's stomach dropped. The mercenary ship was closing the gap. "They're catching up," Marcus exclaimed, his heart racing. "We're not going to make it." Tala's face remained calm, though there was a glint of determination in her eyes. "We're not done yet. Hold on." She pulled the ship into a sharp dive, narrowly avoiding another blast from the enemy ship. The ship's hull groaned under the strain as they raced toward the rift, the energy from the disruptor still buzzing in the air. Marcus glanced back toward the enemy ship. It was too close now. The mercenaries wouldn't stop firing, and they didn't need to hit the ship directly. One well-placed shot could take out the engines, and then they'd be sitting ducks. "We have to make it," Marcus muttered to himself. Tala didn't answer, but her fingers were moving faster, her movements quick and sure. The jump point was just ahead, a shimmering veil in the distance that promised safety, if they could reach it in time. The mercenaries were close now, too close. Another blast hit the side of the ship, sending a shockwave through the cabin. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered. Marcus's breath caught in his throat, but Tala didn't falter. She kept her focus on the jump point ahead. "Come on," Marcus shouted, his voice a mix of frustration and hope. "We're almost there." With a final burst of speed, Tala slammed the ship forward, aiming for the rift. The mercenary ship fired again, but this time, Tala didn't swerve. The ship shot forward, breaking through the rift just as the enemy blast reached them. For a brief moment, everything was silent. The ship shuddered as they entered the jump, the stars around them stretching and warping. Marcus felt the familiar weightlessness of a jump, and for a fleeting second, he thought they were safe. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Tala's hands were still on the controls, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in her face. They had made it through the rift, but they had no idea where they were or who might be waiting for them on the other side. The ship slowed as they entered a new system, the stars ahead unfamiliar and distant. Tala took a deep breath and allowed herself a moment to relax, though her eyes were still scanning the sensors for any signs of pursuit. "We did it," Marcus said, letting out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Tala's lips curled into a small smile, but it was fleeting. "For now. But we're not out of danger yet. We've crossed into uncharted space, and there's no telling what's out here." Marcus nodded, his heart still racing. "What now? Where do we go from here?" Tala stared out at the stars, her gaze distant. "I don't know, but we can't stay here. We need to find a safe place, somewhere we can regroup and figure out what to do next." As the ship coasted through the unknown system, Marcus could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They had escaped the mercenaries, for now, but they were far from safe. The device Tala carried was still a target, and there was no telling who else might be after them. "We'll find a way," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Tala. Tala glanced at him, her expression softening just a little. "I hope so." The ship drifted through the silent stars, the future uncertain but still within their grasp. Whatever came next, Marcus knew one thing for certain: they had each other. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, that was enough.